All of my craft and structure and any of my writing advice, it all roots in the ability to make the audience keep reading. Hello, I am Victoria Aveyard. I am the author of the Red Queen series and the Realm Breaker series, which the second book is coming out very soon, and I am hard at work writing the third and final installment in that trilogy. So because I have done that, or at least fallen ass backwards into doing that almost twice, it seems that Epic Reads thinks I'm a little qualified to talk about what it's like to structure a series from a craft standpoint. I am a big fan of structure, specifically 3-act 8 sequences, which you use for a novel. If you look at my books, you can very much break them down into that pattern. But you can also break my series down into that pattern. That's something people don't really know, is the series itself also has to have that kind of rhythm and cohesion so that the audience feels like they are on this journey that isn't stop-start, that has a pace to it, that is naturally very easy for an audience to feel, and it allows them to get that much deeper into the story because they're not feeling like, oh, this moment was rushed, or I needed a break here, or this part's boring, because everything is happening the way it should. It's almost like a pulse. A story has a pulse, and that is true for a series as well. So for me, I do tend to think about my series, especially with Realm Breaker, which made it a little bit easier because it is 3 books. So you can very much break them down into book 1 is act 1, book 2 is act 2, book 3 is act 3. If you're thinking about stories that are more familiar to you, the original Star Wars trilogy really breaks down to this very well. And you have each individual film have its own structure, have its own act sequencing, but then the story as a whole has it too. It's really cool when you break it down and look at it. So I'm always thinking about structure. I'm always thinking, what's the lowest point of this story? That for me is always the most important part of a book and then a series. For Realm Breaker, the lowest point of the story is at the end of Blade Breaker. And if you are thinking about the Red Queen series, the lowest point of Red Queen, that one gets a little wonky because there's 4 books. I had to stretch it a little bit. The lowest point of Red Queen is probably at the end of King's Cage. Even though at the end of Glass Sword, we really feel low, but the emotional, you have been beaten and defeated, you thought you earned this thing and now you don't have it anymore, is really at the end of King's Cage. And it kind of forces Mare and all the characters around her to readjust. And then we go into our 3rd act, which was Warstorm. And that's why Warstorm is so much momentum, because my 3rd acts, I feel like I've been pushing a stone all the way up this hill. And then 3rd act is when I get to let it go. Bing, 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 bing. The 3rd book in Realm Breaker is going to be lots of fun and lots of battles and lots of momentum and lots of emotional stakes. Which brings me to the second part, the second most important thing I think about when I am crafting a series, and that is escalation. You never want to bore your audience. You never want your audience to feel like you've taken a step back in the progression of the story, and you never want them to feel like something doesn't matter. It doesn't have stakes. So you're always trying to outdo what you did before, and that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, in this book, the battle was 5 on 5. So in the next book, it has to be 50 on 50 and then 500 on 500. That's the very simple way to do escalation, and it's very effective. There are some fantastic books that do that pull that off. Lord of the Rings is one. The battles start very small. The stakes feel very small, and then by the end, you've got whole armies going against each other. But you also have to think about your emotional stakes and the depths to which you are pushing your characters. Things need to matter. Things need to feel more difficult. You need to be throwing as many obstacles as possible at your characters, but also thinking, how do I top this? How do I make sure that this isn't the end of the road for this particular piece of this person's story? Because if you blow it in book 1, you're going to get to book 3 and people are going to be like, been there, done that. That thing was harder than this thing. You want the audience to constantly think they are going to fail. They're not going to get through this obstacle. And then they're going to want to see how the character does it. And that keeps them reading. All of my craft and structure and any of my writing advice, it all roots in the ability to make the audience keep reading, to keep going, to hold on to that rope that you've put in their hands and now you're pulling them. Every trick I have, every piece of world building, every piece of character and plot and action set piece, it is all designed to make sure the audience doesn't put down the book. And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail, but that's always what I'm thinking about. I'm always thinking about the audience. That's, I think, why people connect to my books so well, is because I'm so aware of them. And I think that's why I like writing fantasy the way I do, because Red Queen, Realm Breaker, I've been told by a lot of people, I never read fantasy books, but I love these. And now I want to read more fantasy books. And I find that to be so complimentary. You know, some people are like, oh, I don't want you to think it was too easy or whatever. And I think, no, I want it to be accessible. Fantasy feels like it has a barrier to it. Just because you open the book and there's a map or a family tree, it intimidates people. So we're always trying to design our stories to be as easily metabolized as possible and to not be intimidating, especially when you're working in genre like fantasy, sci-fi. People are going in with preconceived notions, and you can use that to your advantage. So in terms of structuring a series, I would say always be aware of your audience, always be aware of your pacing, always be aware of the general arc and rhythm of the story, and figure out how you're going to keep pulling your reader through those books. It's a very hard thing to do, but I believe in you guys because somehow I've managed to do it a couple of times. So hopefully that was helpful to you. I know I kind of ramble a little bit, but I do love to talk craft, I do love to talk writing, and I do love to talk about my books. So if you have any questions, comments, whatever, put them down below. I talk about this stuff on my Instagram, on my TikTok. I'm always here, and I mean that as a threat.